one of the things that I think is important about being a writer, especially when you're sort of a non-fiction writer, especially in my own particular circumstances where I've basically spent years trying to, I suppose, explore monuments and myths and landscape, and really to explore my own place in those things, you know, and my own connection with them, and in some sense to try and unravel I suppose the mystery of my own being and my own existence in the universe. And it's all very concepts involved, I suppose, are all very big and wide in scope and possibility. That's the wonderful thing about exploring, is because you're not in a position where you claim to know the answers to any of the questions that you ask, and in fact in many cases one question leads to more questions. So the exploration is exciting in itself. So it's an exploration of, I suppose, the human condition, of, you know, the whole story of humanity through history, in the particular frame of reference of Ireland and its uniqueness, its position as an island off Europe and all of the sort of political and geographic and cultural differences, and I suppose the uniqueness that Ireland possesses from many points of view. But I was just thinking about how important it is as a writer and an explorer of these things in particular. So when you're an explorer, you're interpreting, you're looking at a landscape, and you're looking at history, and you're examining mythology, and you're looking for clues, and you're trying to unravel, you know, the driving forces, I suppose, behind the culture. And at the same time, you're trying to ascertain and discern your own place in that. And I think that one of the most important things in those circumstances is to be able to revise your thinking, to be a revisionist, to allow your thinking and your writing to evolve, basically. That, you know, you cannot, when you're dealing with mythology and you're dealing with prehistory, you have the bones of a story. You don't have the complete picture by any means. You're often lacking significant portions of it. And that's where, I suppose, interpretation comes into it. And I think about the Boyne Valley, and I'm actually just right beside the Boyne Canal here, which is right next to the Boyne River, here at Old Bridge, very near Drogheda. And I'm thinking about, you know, the Boyne Valley as being the centre of, for millennia, of a cult or a culture of wisdom, you know, and that's what the Boyne seems to have represented from the earliest times, is the whole idea of wisdom flowing from a source, that source being the well of Segish, Nechtan's well, Trinity well, and also the idea of knowledge that comes in the form of, you know, the creature, the salmon of knowledge in Fiach's pool. And it's interesting that that wisdom has a sort of an austere form in some ways, in that it doesn't seem to be readily accessible to everybody, and then it has a readily available presence for certain figures, Finn McCool, of course, being the prevalent one. I'm thinking also about the likes of the Dagda and Engasog and Boyne, and, you know, some of the principal characters of the very early myths of the Boyne Valley. shortly before Christmas, shortly before the solstice, I wrote a blog post in which I talked about the Tuatha De Danann. And I talked about the fact that I felt that we shouldn't necessarily make deities of the Tuatha De Danann, that we shouldn't think them actual gods, something, you know, that exists perhaps in another realm, some people, some beings, some deities that we can access, that we can communicate with, that we can plead with, as it were. You know, a little bit like the gods of modern religions. That I felt to do that would be to circumvent our own power, our own ability to change things ourselves, and that oftentimes the idea of praying to a god or seeking intervention by divine powers was another way of disempowering ourselves, I suppose, and perhaps that in allowing petitions to be made to the Tuatha De Danann, perhaps we were losing sight of our own power, and that, you know, in essence the Tuatha De Danann represent the very best aspects of ourselves, those things that are hidden in archetypes, of which the likes of Jung and Joseph Campbell referred to. That, you know, for instance, I often identify very closely with Lou Samaldonach. I think principally because he is the many gifted, and because I've never been able to sort of settle on one particular thing in life in terms of the things that I do that make me feel alive and that make me feel I'm living life, because I've got sort of many and varied interests, a bit like Lou Samaldonach. This is the same guy, the same deity, Lou MacEthnan, Lou Lawfada, Lou Samaldonach, Lou son of Ethne, Lou of the long arm, and Lou the many gifted. It's funny, you know, because my own mother is called Ethna. And I am a son of Ethna. But anyway, that's just an aside. But having only written this blog post literally over 2 months ago, I was reading it there yesterday and I was thinking to myself, you know, maybe I'm not right about that. Maybe I shouldn't exclude the idea of deity as something that exists in another realm, as a power, a force, a being. I mean, I'm very attuned to the stories of, you know, as you probably know from reading some of my work, the stories of people who've had near-death experiences, who have encountered some sort of a deity on the other side, as it were. So I shouldn't, I think, exclude the possibility that the Tuatha De Danann do exist as deities somewhere in another realm. I mean, I know that metaphorically the stories of the De Dananns in the She, you know, as a force that can be accessed, may represent, you know, those aspects of ourselves that can be accessed, and that sometimes you have to go through trials in order to be able to access power within yourself that you didn't know was there, you know, latent forces, as it were. And this is an important aspect of my own journey, because in all of the last, say, probably 15 years, I've been on a continuous journey of exploration and of yearning and of trying to connect with something. And sometimes it feels like I'm trying to connect with the gods themselves through the She and through the monuments and through the myths. And then sometimes it feels, yes, I'm very much trying to access something within myself. And I think that my own being has evolved significantly over that time, in many, many different respects. And that perhaps, you know, this power that the Tuatha De Danann represent is twofold. Instead of, you know, ruling out one or the other, isn't it possible that, yes, on the one hand, they represent access to some power within ourselves, something that becomes manifest through the archetype, and also at the same time that they are perhaps, you know, beings, deities in another realm. I'm open to all possibilities, and I refuse to rule out anything, because I think that although science has a certain role to play in all of this, it only has a role. It is not the definitive answer to all of the mysteries. And to be honest with you, if life and our whole existence and the idea of another world, Tir na nog, some sort of a heaven beyond this life, if that isn't real, and if that actually ceases to become mysterious and ceases to become something that is worth exploring, then I suppose you either attain some sort of blissful state, or life becomes very boring. So for the moment, I'm determined to continue the investigation and the exploration, because it's been very exciting, and it's opened up, as I said, many personal revelations for me.